Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Call. The satellite phone crackled to life in the abandoned warehouse outside Kandahar, its harsh ring cutting through the humid Afghan night. Wilson Conrad, crouched behind a concrete pillar with his rifle trained on the compound across the street, let it ring twice before answering. In 12 years of black operations, personal calls during missions meant only one thing: emergency. Conrad here, he whispered, his eyes never leaving the target building where 3 high-value targets were supposedly meeting. Wilson. The voice belonged to Melissa Banks from St. Mary's Hospital back in Phoenix. Her tone made his blood freeze. Your daughter is in critical condition. Your wife's boyfriend threw her out of a speeding car at 90 miles per hour. The words hit him like shrapnel. Bethany, his 7-year-old daughter. Through the static, he could hear her crying in the background, calling for her daddy between labored breaths. Wilson's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. What's her condition? He managed, his voice deadly calm despite the hurricane building inside him. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, possible spinal damage. She's asking for you, Wilson. The doctors, they don't know if she'll make it through the night. Before Wilson could respond, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Commander Gabriel Harper, a man who'd seen 3 wars and countless covert operations, had been monitoring the call through the tactical network. His weathered face showed the kind of fury reserved for those who hurt children. Soldier, Harper said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have 24 hours. Go and make him disappear forever. Wilson stood slowly, his 6'2" frame uncoiling like a predator preparing to strike. At 34, he'd eliminated more threats to national security than most people knew existed. He'd operated in shadows where morality was a luxury and survival was an art form. But this wasn't about national security. This was personal. Who is he? Harper asked, already signaling for extraction. Drew Wood, unemployed mechanic with a drug problem and a temper. Wilson's voice carried no emotion, but his eyes burned with the promise of violence. He's been sleeping with my wife for 6 months. Harper nodded grimly. The helicopter will have you stateside in 18 hours. The rest is off the books. As Wilson gathered his gear, muscle memory taking over while his mind raced, he thought about Samantha, his wife of 9 years, the woman he'd trusted with his life, his heart, and most importantly, his daughter. The woman who'd grown cold and distant during his deployments, who'd started arguments about his absence, who'd eventually stopped arguing altogether. He should have seen the signs. The new clothes, the sudden interest in staying fit, the way she turned her phone face down whenever he was home. But he'd been focused on the mission, on providing for his family, on serving his country. He'd trusted her. That trust had nearly cost him his daughter's life. The extraction helicopter's rotors were already spinning when Wilson jogged across the landing zone. As he climbed aboard, he pulled out his personal phone and scrolled through the photos of Bethany, her gap-toothed smile at Christmas, her pride at learning to ride a bike, her face covered in cake frosting on her 7th birthday just 2 months ago. Someone would pay for every tear she'd shed tonight. Someone would pay for every broken bone, every moment of fear and pain. Wilson Conrad had spent his adult life being very good at making people disappear. Now, he was going to put those skills to very personal use. The helicopter lifted off into the desert darkness, carrying a father toward a reckoning that Drew Wood couldn't possibly imagine. Chapter 2. Fractured Foundation. 24 hours earlier, Wilson had been Wilson Conrad, the husband and father, reviewing mission parameters in a secure briefing room. Now, sitting in the stark fluorescent lighting of Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, waiting for his connection to complete, he was someone else entirely. The transformation hadn't taken long. It never did. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister-in-law, Catherine Conrad. Samantha's at the hospital with Bethany. Drew left after the accident. Police are looking for him, but no luck yet. Wilson deleted the message and leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair, remembering how it all began. He'd met Samantha Guzman at a veteran support group 9 years ago. She'd been volunteering, helping returning soldiers readjust to civilian life. She was beautiful, compassionate, and seemed to understand the burden of service. They'd married within 6 months. For the first few years, it had worked. Samantha had embraced the military wife life, the deployments, the secrecy, the constant moving. When Bethany was born, she'd seemed fulfilled, pouring all her energy into being a mother. Wilson had believed they were building something permanent, something worth fighting for. The cracks started showing around year 5. Wilson's deployments became longer and more frequent as his skills made him indispensable to increasingly sensitive operations. Samantha began complaining about being a single mother, about missing him, about feeling abandoned. He tried to explain that his work mattered, that he was protecting people like her and Bethany. But explanations couldn't fill an empty bed or help with midnight fevers. By year 7, Samantha had stopped complaining. She'd grown colder, more independent. When Wilson came home from missions, she'd be polite but distant. She'd started working part-time at a local gym, claiming she needed to get out of the house. She'd made new friends, started going out more, developed interests that didn't include him. Wilson had noticed but hadn't acted. In the field, survival depended on reading every micro-expression, catching every tell. At home, he'd chosen to trust instead of investigate. It had been a costly mistake. Druid had entered the picture 6 months ago. A divorce mechanic with a history of bar fights and drunk driving. He'd been working out at Samantha's gym. Wilson had met him once, briefly, when he'd come home unexpectedly from mission. Drew had been fixing Samantha's car in their driveway, on a Sunday, for free, with his shirt off despite the Arizona heat. Wilson's instincts had screamed danger, but Samantha had explained it away. Drew was just being helpful. He was going through a rough patch and needed the money. She was just being kind. Wilson had accepted the explanation because he'd wanted to believe it, because questioning it would have meant acknowledging that his marriage was failing while he was away serving his country. The announcement for his connecting flight pulled Wilson back to the present. As he boarded, he thought about the conversation he'd had with Catherine 3 weeks ago. She called while he was in Virginia, between missions. "Wilson, I think you need to know something about Samantha." He'd been exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much caffeine. "What about her?" "I saw her at Rosario's last Tuesday night, with that mechanic. They were close." Wilson had felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Close how?" "Holding hands close. Kissing close." "I'm sorry, Wilson. I thought you should know." He'd hung up without saying goodbye, then sat in his sterile hotel room, staring at the wall. He'd had 2 choices: confront Samantha immediately or wait until he got home and could handle it properly. He'd chosen to wait. Another mistake. Now his daughter was fighting for her life because Drew had lost his temper and thrown a 7-year-old girl from a moving vehicle like she was garbage. Because Samantha had brought a violent criminal into their lives and exposed Bethany to danger. Because Wilson had been playing soldier while his family fell apart. The plane lifted off into the Arizona sky, carrying Wilson toward a hospital room where his daughter lay broken in a reckoning that would reshape every life it touched. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through Drew Wood's social media profiles, memorizing addresses, habits, associates. The man had been stupid enough to document his entire life online. It would make finding him much easier. And when Wilson found him, Drew would learn that some fathers don't forgive. Some fathers don't forget. And some fathers are very, very good at making problems disappear permanently. Chapter 3. Broken Angel. St. Mary's Hospital at 3 in the morning was a cathedral of fluorescent despair. Wilson moved through the corridors like a ghost, his civilian clothes, jeans, and a black t-shirt, doing nothing to disguise the predatory way he carried himself. Nurses and security guards instinctively stepped aside without knowing why. He found Bethany in the pediatric ICU, small and fragile against the white sheets, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. Her left arm was in a cast, her face bruised and swollen, her breathing assisted by a ventilator. Wilson's hands clenched into fists at the sight of his daughter reduced to this broken thing. "She's stable," Dr. Gerald Pena said quietly from behind him. The man looked exhausted, his scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. 3 broken ribs, fractured left arm, severe concussion, and internal bleeding that we've managed to control. The next 48 hours will tell us about possible brain trauma. Wilson nodded, not trusting his voice. He pulled up a chair beside Bethany's bed and took her good hand in his. Even unconscious, she gripped his fingers weakly. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper, distorted by the breathing tube. "I'm here, baby girl. Daddy's here now." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but seeking. When she found his face, tears began flowing down her cheeks. "It hurts so much, Daddy." He was so angry. Wilson leaned closer, his voice gentle despite the rage building inside him. "Can you tell me what happened, sweetheart?" Bethany's story came out in fragments, interrupted by pain and medication. She'd been in the back seat of Drew's truck when he and Samantha started fighting. Drew had been drinking. She could smell it, the same smell that reminded her of Uncle Ron at Christmas. Samantha had told Drew to slow down, that he was scaring Bethany. "He said mean things about you, Daddy. Called you names." Mommy told him to stop, but he got madder. He said you weren't my real daddy anymore." Wilson's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "What happened next, baby?" Mommy tried to take the wheel. Drew hit her, and the truck went fast, really fast. Then he opened my door, and Bethany's voice broke. "He said I was just extra baggage. He pushed me out, Daddy." He didn't even slow down. The machines around them seemed to beep louder as Wilson processed what his daughter had just told him. Drew hadn't just thrown her out in a moment of rage during an accident. He deliberately opened the door and pushed a 7-year-old child from a moving vehicle at highway speeds. It had been attempted murder. "Where's Mommy now?" Wilson asked. "She came to see me earlier. She was crying a lot. She said she was sorry and that she was going to make Drew go away." Bethany's eyes grew heavy from the medication. "I told her I just wanted you to come home." Wilson kissed his daughter's forehead. "Sleep now. Daddy's going to make everything okay." As Bethany drifted back into medicated sleep, Wilson stepped into the hallway where Catherine was waiting. His sister-in-law looked like she'd aged 5 years in one night, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and worn. "Where is she?" Wilson asked. "Samantha? She went home around midnight. Said she needed to change clothes and think." Catherine's voice carried barely contained anger. "Wilson, there's something else you need to know. The police talked to some witnesses. Drew didn't just push Bethany out. According to a trucker who saw it happen, he actually grabbed her by the back of her shirt and threw her." Wilson's hands slowly curled into fists. "Any word on where he is?" "Police have his truck description and license plate, but no sign of him yet. His apartment's empty, and his ex-wife says she hasn't seen him in months." Catherine studied Wilson's face with growing concern. "You have that look, Wilson. The one you get when you're about to do something that can't be undone." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. I've known you for 9 years. I know what you do for work, even if I don't know the details. And right now, you look like you're planning to kill someone." Wilson met her eyes directly. "If Drew Wood is still breathing 48 hours from now, it won't be because I didn't try to find him." Catherine grabbed his arm. "Wilson, think about Bethany. She needs her father, not a father in prison for murder. She needs her father to make sure the monster who tried to kill her never hurts anyone again." Wilson gently removed her hand. "And she needs to know that people who hurt her family face consequences." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the contacts until he found Felix Price, a former teammate who now worked private security in Phoenix. Felix had gone civilian 3 years ago, but maintained connections throughout the darker corners of the city. "Felix, it's Wilson. I need a favor." "Jesus, Wilson, I heard about Bethany. How is she?" "Alive, barely. I need everything you can find on Drew Wood. Everything. Where he drinks, where he buys drugs, who he owes money to, where he might run when he's scared. I need it in 6 hours." There was a pause. "Wilson, man, you need to let the cops handle this. The cops are going to arrest him and put him in a cage where he'll be fed 3 meals a day and given cable TV. That's not justice for what he did to my daughter." Another pause. "I'll make some calls." Wilson hung up and looked back through the window at Bethany, so small and broken in her hospital bed. Drew would have made a fatal error in judgment. He'd hurt the one person in the world that Wilson Conrad would kill or die for. And now he was going to learn that some sins can't be forgiven, some crimes can't be forgotten, and some fathers are very, very good at making problems disappear forever. Chapter 4. Hunting Shadows. Felix Price arrived at the hospital cafeteria at dawn, carrying a manila envelope and the grim expression of a man who'd spent the night talking to people who didn't talk to strangers. Wilson sat across from him at a corner table, nursing black coffee that had long since gone cold. "This isn't good, Wilson," Felix said, sliding the envelope across the table. "Druid isn't just some loser mechanic with a temper. He's connected." Wilson opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table. Police reports, financial records, surveillance photos, and what looked like pages from a very unofficial dossier. Druid's life laid bare in stark black and white. Connected how? His cousin is Rodney Goodwin, runs drugs for the Sinaloa cartel through Phoenix. Drew's been doing odd jobs for the operation. Nothing major, just moving packages and providing alibis. But it means he's got places to hide and people who will help him disappear. Wilson studied a surveillance photo of Drew leaving a warehouse in South Phoenix. The man was larger than Wilson remembered. 6 feet tall, maybe 220, with the build of someone who'd spent years doing manual labor. Prison tattoos covered his arms, including what looked like gang affiliations. "There's more," Felix continued. "The reason he was so angry yesterday? Samantha had been pressuring him to leave his wife. Apparently, she thought you were never coming back from your latest deployment and wanted to start fresh with Drew. When he found out you were coming home, he lost it." Wilson's jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" "Best guess. His cousin's got a safe house in Guadalupe. Old adobe place, surrounded by junkyards and industrial lots. Perfect for making someone disappear." Felix leaned forward. "Wilson, Rodney's not some small-time dealer. He's got serious firepower and zero tolerance for people who threaten his operation. If you go after Drew, you'll be starting a war. Then I'll finish one." Wilson gathered the papers and photos. "What about the police investigation?" "Detective Benny Crosby's handling it. Good cop, but he's working the case by the book. They've got an APB out, but Drew's truck was found burned out this morning in Tempe. He's definitely running scared." Wilson stood and pulled out $500 in cash. "For your time and your discretion." Felix pushed the money back. "Keep it. Just be careful, man. Bethany needs her father alive." Wilson pocketed the cash and headed for the parking garage. His truck, a modified Ford F-150 with reinforced panels and hidden compartments, waited in the shadows. He'd bought it with the understanding that his work sometimes followed him home. Today, he was grateful for the paranoia. The drive to his house took 20 minutes through morning traffic. The 2-story colonial in Ahwatukee looked exactly as he'd left it 3 weeks ago. Manicured lawn, white picket fence, the American dream in suburban form. Only now it felt like a stage set, a lie he'd been living without knowing it. Samantha's car was in the driveway. Wilson sat in his truck for a moment, studying the house where he believed he was building a life. Then he got out and walked to the front door. She was waiting in the living room, still wearing the same clothes from the hospital. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smeared from crying, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. When she saw Wilson, she started to stand, then seemed to think better of it. "Wilson, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." He studied her face, looking for any trace of the woman he'd married. "How long? What? How long have you been sleeping with him?" Samantha's composure cracked. 6 months, but Wilson, it wasn't supposed to. 6 months. Wilson's voice was deadly calm. "You brought a drug dealer with a history of violence into our home. Around her daughter. For 6 months. I didn't know about the drugs. He told me he was trying to get his life together." Wilson stepped closer, and Samantha instinctively backed away. She'd never seen this side of him, the predator he became when lives were on the line. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't care. You just opened your leg for the first man who paid attention to you while your husband was serving his country. Don't you dare judge me." Samantha's voice rose. "You were never here. I was raising Bethany alone while you played soldier all over the world. I was protecting people like you and Bethany, building a future for our family." Wilson's eyes were cold as winter, and you were destroying it. "I love the Wilson. I thought maybe we could all be happy." "Happy? Wilson repeated the word like it was foreign. Is Bethany happy right now, Samantha? Lying in that hospital bed with broken bones and possible brain damage because your boyfriend threw her out a moving truck? Samantha collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can get counseling, work things out. Drew's gone, and I'll never see him again. We can. There's no we anymore. Wilson's voice cut through her tears like a blade. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. He headed upstairs to their bedroom, his bedroom now, and pulled a large duffel bag from the closet. From a hidden compartment behind the dresser, he retrieved items that Samantha had never known existed. Night vision goggles, encrypted communication devices, body armor, and an arsenal that would have impressed most SWAT teams. When he came back downstairs, Samantha was still crying. Where are you going? She asked. Wilson paused at the front door. To clean up your mess. Wilson, please don't do anything stupid. Think about Bethany. He turned to look at her one last time. I'm thinking about Bethany. I'm thinking about a father's responsibility to protect his child from monsters, even when those monsters were invited in by his wife. Wilson left Samantha crying in their living room and drove away from the life he'd thought he was building. In 6 hours, when visiting hours started, he'd be back at Bethany's bedside. But first, he had a war to start and a man to kill. Drew had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Now, he was going to learn what happened when someone hurt Wilson Conrad's daughter. Chapter 5. The Devil's Bargain. The Rusty Anchor was the kind of bar where people went to disappear. Located in a strip mall between a pawn shop and a check-cashing store, it attracted the desperate, the dangerous, and those who fell somewhere in between. Wilson sat in his truck across the street, watching through binoculars as the afternoon crowd filtered in and out. According to Felix's intelligence, Rodney Goodwin conducted business here every Tuesday between 3 and 5. Drug money got laundered through the bar's gaming machines, and information flowed as freely as the watered-down whiskey. If Drew was hiding in Phoenix, someone here would know where. Wilson checked his gear one more time. Concealed pistol, tactical knife, zip ties, and a small electronic device that would disable cell phones within a 30-foot radius. He wasn't planning to start a fight, but if one found him, he'd finish it. The bar's interior was exactly what he'd expected. Dim lighting, cheap paneling, and the smell of spilled beer and broken dreams. A handful of men sat at the bar, nursing drinks and avoiding eye contact. In a corner booth, Rodney Goodwin held court with 2 lieutenants, counting money from a gym bag. Wilson approached the bar and ordered a beer, keeping Rodney in his peripheral vision. The man was smaller than his cousin Drew, maybe 5'8" and wiry, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight because he always fought dirty. You're new, the bartender said, sliding a bottle across the scarred wood surface. Her name, Tag, read Connie, and she had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. Passing through, Wilson replied, taking a sip of beer that tasted like it had been filtered through sand. Most people who come here aren't passing through. They're running to or running from. Wilson met her eyes. Which one are you? Connie smiled grimly. Both. At the corner booth, Rodney was finishing his business. The lieutenants pocketed their shares and headed for the door, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his paranoia. Wilson waited until they were gone, then approached the table. Rodney Goodwin. The man looked up, his hand automatically moving to the bulge under his jacket. Do I know you? Wilson Conrad. I believe you know my wife, Samantha, and your cousin Drew. Rodney's eyes narrowed. You're the soldier boy. Heard you were overseas. Change of plans. Wilson sat down uninvited, his posture relaxed but ready. I'm looking for Drew. Drew's family. I don't give up family to strangers. Wilson leaned forward slightly. Drew threw my 7-year-old daughter out of a moving truck last night. She's in the ICU fighting for her life. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you think carefully before you answer. Where is Drew Wood? Rodney laughed, but there was no humor in it. You got balls, soldier boy, coming into my place and making threats. But you're in my world now, and my world has different rules. You're right, Wilson said calmly. Your world does have different rules. In your world, violence solves problems. In your world, family is sacred. In your world, a man protects what's his. He pulled out his phone and showed Rodney a photo of Bethany in her hospital bed, broken and connected to machines. "This is what your cousin did to my family. To a 7-year-old girl who never hurt anyone." Wilson's voice remained conversational, but his eyes were arctic. "Now, in your world, what do you think should happen to Drew?" Rodney studied the photo, and for a moment, something like disgust flickered across his face. Jesus Christ. Drew always had a temper, but this is what he is. A man who hurts children. Wilson put the phone away. "I'm going to find him either way, Rodney. The question is whether you help me or get in my way. And if I get in your way," Wilson smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Rodney had ever seen. "Then I'll go through you, and everyone who stands with you. And when I'm done, there won't be enough left of this operation to fill a shot glass." Rodney was quiet for a long moment, considering his options. Finally, he spoke. "You know what Drew's problem is? He's stupid. Always has been. Gets emotional. Makes bad decisions." He took a drink from his beer. "Throwing a kid out of truck? That's the kind of thing that brings heat on all of us." "So, where is he?" "Safe house in Guadalupe. Industrial district, surrounded by junkyards. But it's not just Drew there. He's got 3 of my boys watching him until things cool down." Wilson absorbed this information. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Drew's become a liability. And because—" Rodney looked at the photo on Wilson's phone again. "Because some things are just wrong, family or not." He pulled out a pen and drew a rough map on a napkin. "Here's the address. But Soldier Boy? Those boys guarding him are good at what they do. They won't just hand him over." Wilson studied the map, memorizing the details. "I'm not asking them to. You're planning to take on 4 armed men by yourself? I've taken on worse odds with worse stakes." Wilson stood to leave. "There's just one thing you need to understand, Rodney. After tonight, this never happened. You never saw me, never talked to me, never heard my name. Because if you or anyone in your organization ever comes near my family again, I'll make Drew's fate look merciful." Rodney nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Wilson, when you find Drew, make it count. Make sure he understands why he's dying." Wilson walked out of the Rusty Anchor, carrying the location of his daughter's would-be killer and a clear understanding of what needed to happen next. As he drove toward Guadalupe, he thought about the men he'd killed in service to his country, enemy combatants, terrorists, threats to national security. Tonight would be different. Tonight would be personal. And Drewwood was going to learn that some fathers don't forgive, don't forget, and don't leave anything to chance. Chapter 6. Blood and Concrete. The industrial district of Guadalupe at midnight was a maze of shadows and rust, where the only lights came from security lamps that barely penetrated the darkness. Wilson parked his truck 3 blocks from the target and made his final approach on foot, moving through the labyrinth of abandoned warehouses and junkyards like a predator in his natural element. The safe house was exactly where Rodney had indicated, a single-story adobe building surrounded by automotive graveyards and industrial debris. 2 cars sat in the gravel driveway, a beat-up sedan and a newer pickup truck. Lights were on in the front windows, and Wilson could see shadows moving behind drawn curtains. He circled the building twice, identifying entry points, escape routes, and potential complications. The property was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, but years of weather had created gaps near the back corner. A single guard walked the perimeter every 30 minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking on his phone. Wilson waited until the guard completed his circuit, then slipped through the fence and approached the house from the rear. Through a cracked window, he could see into what had once been a kitchen. Drew had sat at a folding table, playing cards with 2 other men. Empty beer bottles and fast food containers littered the space, and a small pile of white powder on a mirror suggested they'd been sampling their own product. Drew looked older than his 32 years, worn down by alcohol, drugs, and poor choices. His left hand was bandaged, probably injured when he'd grabbed Bethany to throw her from the truck. The thought of those hands touching his daughter made Wilson's jaw clench. The third guard was in the living room, watching television with his back to the window. All 3 men were armed, pistols in shoulder holsters or tucked into waistbands. They were alert but relaxed, confident that their isolation and firepower made them safe. They were wrong. Wilson activated his cell phone jammer and moved to the electrical panel on the side of the house. A quick examination revealed the main breaker. Cutting power would create chaos and confusion, giving him the advantage he needed. But first, he had to eliminate the outside guard. The man was on his third cigarette of the hour when Wilson appeared behind him like a ghost. A sleeper hold applied with professional precision dropped him unconscious in seconds. Wilson zip-tied his hands and feet, then dragged him behind a pile of rusted car parts where he wouldn't be found until morning. Back at the electrical panel, Wilson waited until he heard laughter from inside the house, Drew telling some joke about Samantha, then cut the power. The darkness was immediate and complete. Shouts erupted from inside as the men scrambled for flashlights and tried to figure out what had happened. Wilson was already moving, using night vision goggles to navigate the chaos he'd created. The back door was unlocked, a mistake that would cost them dearly. Wilson entered through the kitchen just as Drew was fumbling for a flashlight. The tactical knife slid between his ribs like it was finding its way home, puncturing his lung and dropping him to the floor, gasping. "That's for Bethany," Wilson whispered, then moved toward the living room. The guard who'd been watching television was stumbling around in the dark, his pistol drawn, but useless without a target. Wilson took him down with a blow to the throat that crushed his windpipe, then zip-tied his hands before he could recover. The third man, the card player from the kitchen, had found a flashlight and was sweeping it wildly around the room. "Drew! Roberto! What the hell is happening?" Wilson stepped into the beam of light, his tactical gear and night vision goggles, making him look like something from a nightmare. The man raised his pistol, but Wilson was already moving. The gun went flying, and its owner followed it to the floor with a broken wrist and shattered nose. When Wilson flipped the lights back on, Drew was still on the kitchen floor, blood frothing from his mouth as he struggled to breathe. His eyes went wide when he saw Wilson standing over him. "You remember me?" Wilson asked, pulling up a chair. "Bethany's father." Drew tried to speak, but only managed a wet gurgle. Wilson knelt down and applied pressure to the knife wound, not to heal, but to prolong the inevitable. "She's 7 years old," Wilson said conversationally. "Loves horses and ice cream and those stupid princess movies. She still sleeps with a nightlight because she's afraid of the dark." He increased the pressure, and Drew's eyes bulged. "She trusted you, and you threw her out of a moving truck like she was garbage." Drew managed to whisper, "Sorry." Wilson's voice was ice. "You're sorry? Do you know what her injuries are, Drew?" 3 broken ribs, fractured arm, severe concussion, internal bleeding. She might have brain damage. She might never be the same. He pulled out his phone and showed Drew the same photo he'd shown Rodney. Bethany in her hospital bed, small and broken and connected to machines. "This is what you did. This is why you're going to die." Drew's eyes were pleading now, tears mixing with the blood on his face. Wilson felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just the cold certainty that this needed to be done. "Please." Drew managed to wheeze. "You didn't listen when she said please," Wilson replied. "When she begged you to stop, when she cried for her daddy, when she was scared and in pain. So why should I listen to you?" He twisted the knife, and Drew's body convulsed. "This is for every tear my daughter shed because of you. For every moment of pain. For every nightmare she's going to have." Drew had died as he'd lived, violently and without dignity. Wilson closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for Drew's soul, but for forgiveness for what he'd had to become. The other 2 men were zip-tied and unconscious but alive. Wilson left them that way. They were just hired muscle, not the monster who'd hurt his daughter. But he left them with a message written in Drew's blood on the kitchen wall. Some sins can't be forgiven. By the time Wilson reached his truck, sirens were wailing in the distance. Someone had heard the commotion and called the police. But Wilson was already miles away, driving through the desert darkness toward the hospital where his daughter waited. Drew was dead. The monster who tried to kill Bethany would never hurt another child. But Wilson's war wasn't over yet. Samantha had brought that monster into their lives, had endangered their daughter with her betrayal and selfishness. And Wilson Conrad never forgot. And he never forgave. Chapter 7. Ashes of Betrayal. The Phoenix Police Department was buzzing with activity when Detective Benny Crosby arrived at the Guadalupe crime scene. The safe house looked like a war zone. One body in the kitchen, two survivors with serious injuries, and evidence of a methodical assault by someone with professional training. Drew would lay in a pool of his own blood, a tactical knife protruding from his chest. The message on the wall, written in crimson letters, left little doubt about motive. Some sins can't be forgiven. Professional job, said Officer Gary Ware, the first responder. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Disabled communications, cut power, took out 4 armed men without firing a shot. Crosby studied the scene with the practiced eye of a 20-year veteran. The zip tie restraints, the precision of the violence, the tactical efficiency. This wasn't random street justice. This was military. What about the survivors? Both hospitalized. One's got a crushed windpipe, might not make it. The other has a broken wrist and nose, but he's talking. Says a guy in tactical gear came out of nowhere like some kind of ghost. Crosby's phone rang. It was his partner, Detective Marcella Pennington, calling from the hospital. Benny, we've got a problem. I just talked to Samantha Conrad about her husband's whereabouts last night. She says he was home with her all evening, watching TV and drinking beer. She's sticking to that story like her life depends on it. Wilson Conrad, Crosby muttered. I was wondering when he'd surface. You think he did this? Crosby looked at the surgical precision of the attack, the military-style execution. Drew would threw this man's 7-year-old daughter out of a moving truck. What do you think? The problem was proving it. Wilson Conrad was a decorated Special Forces operator with an impeccable service record and no criminal history. His wife was providing an alibi, and unless the surviving gang members identified him, which seemed unlikely given their line of work, the case would stall. Meanwhile, at Phoenix General Hospital, Wilson sat beside Bethany's bed as she slowly woke from her medicated sleep. Her injuries were healing, but the doctors were still concerned about potential brain trauma. She'd been asking for him all morning. Daddy. Her voice was stronger today, less slurred by pain medication. I'm here, baby girl. Is the bad man gone? Wilson took her small hand in his. Yes, sweetheart. The bad man is gone. He'll never hurt you again. Bethany smiled for the first time since the accident. Good. I had a dream that you made him go away forever. Sometimes dreams come true. Wilson kissed her forehead. How are you feeling? Better. Aunt Catherine brought me ice cream, and Dr. Pena says I might go home soon. Her expression grew serious. Daddy, why did Mommy let the bad man hurt me? The question hit Wilson like a physical blow. How do you explain betrayal and adultery to a 7-year-old? How do you tell a child that her mother's selfishness had nearly cost her life? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Bethany. Really big mistakes that hurt the people they love. Is Mommy in trouble? Wilson was quiet for a long moment. Mommy made choices that put you in danger. And now she has to live with those choices. Catherine appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone bearing bad news. She waited until Bethany fell back asleep before speaking. The police were at the house this morning. They questioned Samantha about Drew's death. Wilson showed no reaction. What did she tell them? That you were home with her all night. She's covering for you, Wilson. Smart of her. Catherine studied his face. You really did it, didn't you? You killed Drew Wood. Drew Wood is dead. That's all that matters. The police know it was you. They can't prove it, but they know. Wilson stood and moved to the window, watching the morning traffic below. Let them know. Drew Wood was a cancer, and I cut it out. The world is safer without him. What about Samantha? What happens to her? Wilson turned back to Catherine, his expression cold. Samantha made her choices. She brought a violent criminal into our home, endangered our daughter, and destroyed our family. Those choices have consequences. You're planning something. I'm planning to protect my daughter from anyone who might hurt her, including her mother. Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice. Wilson, Bethany needs her mother. Whatever Samantha did, she loves that little girl. Love. Wilson's laugh was bitter. Samantha's version of love nearly got Bethany killed. She chose Drew Wood over her own daughter's safety. That's not love. That's selfish destruction. So what's your plan? Take Bethany away? Disappear? Wilson looked back at his sleeping daughter. Something like that. That afternoon, while Bethany napped, Wilson drove to the house he'd shared with Samantha for 9 years. Police tapes still surrounded the property from their investigation, but the search was complete. Samantha's car was gone. She was probably staying with friends, afraid to face him alone. Wilson packed methodically. Bethany's clothes, toys, and treasured possessions went into suitcases. Important documents, birth certificates, medical records, his military service files, went into a secure briefcase. Everything else could be replaced. From his hidden safe, he retrieved $50,000 in cash, multiple sets of identification documents for himself and Bethany, and contact information for people who specialized in helping others disappear. His military service had taught him to plan for contingencies, and betrayal had always been a possibility he'd prepared for. His phone rang as he was loading the truck. Samantha. Wilson, please, we need to talk. No, we don't. She's my daughter too. You can't just take her away. Wilson's voice was deadly calm. Watch me. I'll call the police. I'll tell them what you did to Drew. You already lied to the police for me, Samantha. You told them I was with you all night. If you change your story now, they'll charge you with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. Silence on the line. Besides, Wilson continued, who are you going to tell them took Bethany? Her father? The decorated war veteran with no criminal record who's been caring for his injured daughter while his adulterous wife parties with drug dealers. Please, Wilson. I know I made mistakes, but I love her. Your love nearly killed her. That's not a mistake, Samantha. That's criminal negligence. Wilson hung up and finished loading the truck. By the time Samantha arrived at the hospital, he and Bethany would be gone. By the time she realized what was happening, they'd be untraceable. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some sins had consequences that lasted forever. And some fathers would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect their daughters from the people who'd already hurt them once. Wilson Conrad was that kind of father. Chapter 8. Ghosts and New Beginnings. 6 months after Drew Wood's death, Wilson and Bethany Conrad officially ceased to exist. The man who picked up his daughter from Phoenix General Hospital under the cover of a medical transfer was named Gabriel Fletcher, and his daughter was now Sarah Fletcher. Their new identity documents were flawless, their backstory bulletproof, and their destination a small coastal town in Oregon where no one asked too many questions about newcomers seeking a fresh start. Bethany, now Sarah, had healed remarkably well. The physical injuries were mostly gone, leaving only small scars and a slight hesitation in her left arm when she reached for things. The emotional trauma was healing too, helped by a new environment far from the memories of Phoenix and a father who was finally home every night. Wilson had left the military officially through medical discharge, PTSD, and traumatic stress from losing his daughter in a violent attack. The paperwork was genuine, filed by his commanding officer Gabriel Harper, who understood that some soldiers needed to disappear to protect what mattered most. Wilson's service record was sealed, his current location classified, and anyone looking for him would find only dead ends and bureaucratic walls. They lived in a house on Cannon Beach, Oregon, where the Pacific Ocean crashed against the rocks and tourists came to forget their troubles. Wilson worked as a carpenter under his new identity, building custom furniture and home renovations for the summer people. It was honest work, peaceful work, the kind of life he'd always imagined having with his family. Bethany attended the local elementary school under her new name, making friends and excelling in her studies. She still had nightmares sometimes, but they were becoming less frequent. She never asked about her mother, and Wilson didn't volunteer information. Some wounds needed to heal completely before they could be reopened. In Phoenix, the Drew Wood murder case had gone cold. The 2 surviving gang members had refused to cooperate, claiming they'd never seen their attacker's face. Rodney Goodwin had provided no useful information to police, maintaining that Drew had been living in fear of unknown enemies. The investigation stalled for lack of evidence and witnesses. Samantha Conrad had been devastated by her daughter's disappearance. She'd hired private investigators, filed missing persons reports, and haunted police stations demanding action. But Wilson's preparations had been thorough, There was no trail to follow, no breadcrumbs to trace. Gabriel Fletcher and his daughter Sarah had appeared in Oregon with proper documentation and legitimate backgrounds, while Wilson and Bethany Conrad had simply vanished. The private investigators had eventually concluded that Wilson had used his military training and connections to disappear completely. Their report recommended that Samantha accept the reality of the situation and move on with her life. It was advice she'd been unable to take. One evening in November, as Wilson was helping Sarah with homework at their kitchen table, his secure phone rang. Only 5 people had the number, and all of them knew to call only in emergencies. "Gabriel Fletcher," he answered. "Wilson, it's Felix." His old friend's voice was tense. "We need to talk." Wilson glanced at Sarah, who was absorbed in a math problem. "Hold on." He stepped onto the porch overlooking the ocean. The November storm that had been building all day was finally breaking, sending waves crashing against the beach below. "What's the situation?" Samantha hired new investigators. "These guys aren't local PIs. They're federal contractors with serious resources. They've been digging into your military service, trying to trace your connections." Wilson felt cold that had nothing to do with the ocean wind. "How deep have they gotten?" "Not far yet, but they're persistent. They've identified some of your old teammates and started asking questions. So far, everyone's keeping quiet, but if they keep pushing..." Wilson was already thinking through contingencies. Oregon was blown if federal contractors were involved. They'd have resources and authority that local police couldn't match. He and Sarah would need to move again, assume new identities, find another safe haven. "There's more," Felix continued. "Samantha's been telling anyone who'll listen that you murdered Drew Wood in cold blood. She's trying to trade information about Drew's death for help finding Bethany." Wilson's jaw tightened. Even now, even after everything, Samantha was trying to destroy what was left of their family. Her daughter was safe, healing, building a new life far from the chaos and violence that Samantha had brought into their world. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted Bethany back so she could assuage her guilt and pretend that her betrayal hadn't cost them everything. "Any word on how long we have?" "Maybe a week before they start connecting dots." "These guys are good, Wilson. They'll find the identity trail eventually." Wilson looked through the window at Sarah, her face scrunched in concentration as she worked through her math problems. She was happy here. She had friends, a school she liked, a life free from fear and violence. Moving again would traumatize her, but staying might be worse. "Thanks for the warning, Felix. I owe you. Just keep that little girl safe. She's been through enough." Wilson hung up and stood on the porch for a long time, watching the storm rage over the ocean. Some battles never really ended. Some wars just moved to new fronts with new stakes. But he'd made his choice 6 months ago when he'd carried his broken daughter out of that Phoenix hospital. He would protect Sarah from anyone who tried to hurt her, including federal investigators and biological mothers who cared more about their own guilt than their daughter's welfare. If that meant disappearing again, becoming someone new, then that's what they'd do. Wilson went back inside and sat down beside his daughter. "How's the homework coming?" "Good. Mr. Peterson says I'm the best at math in the whole 3rd grade." Sarah looked up at him with eyes that were bright and curious, no longer haunted by nightmares. "Daddy, can we go to the beach tomorrow? I want to find more sand dollars." "We'll see, sweetheart. We might need to take a little trip soon." "Like a vacation?" Wilson smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Something like that." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their small house by the ocean, a father and daughter worked on homework together and planned for tomorrow. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. They'd survive the worst that betrayal and violence could offer, and they'd emerge stronger. Some families were bound by blood and law. Others were forged in fire and protected by love and determination. Wilson knew which kind he'd rather have. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. 3 years after vanishing from Phoenix, Wilson and Sarah Conrad, now permanently David and Emma Walsh, live in a small town outside Yellowstone National Park. Wilson worked as a wilderness guide, his military training and survival skills making him invaluable to tourists seeking authentic outdoor experiences. Sarah, now 10, was thriving in the clean mountain air excelling in school, and developing a love for photography that captured the wild beauty of their surroundings. The federal investigators had eventually given up their search. Without cooperation from Wilson's former military contacts, and faced with a paper trail that led nowhere, they concluded that Gabriel Fletcher and his daughter had died in a wilderness accident. Bodies never recovered, presumed lost to the harsh Oregon coastline. The case files were archived, the contracts expired, and Samantha Conrad was left with nothing but the knowledge that her daughter was somewhere beyond her reach. Wilson had thought their war was over. He was wrong. On a Tuesday evening in September, as Sarah helped him prepare dinner in their small cabin, a knock came at the door. Wilson immediately recognized the careful rhythm. Not a neighbor or tourist, but someone with tactical training trying to appear casual. "Stay in the kitchen," he told Sarah quietly, his hand automatically moving to the pistol concealed under his shirt. Through the peephole, Wilson saw a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and the kind of conservative clothing that screamed federal agent. Beside her stood a man in a sheriff's uniform. Local law enforcement providing backup for whatever this was about. Wilson opened the door, but kept his body blocking the entrance. "David Walsh?" the woman asked, though her eyes said she already knew the answer. "That's right. I'm Agent Stacy Elliott, FBI. This is Sheriff Ron Christian. We'd like to ask you some questions about Wilson Conrad." Wilson's expression remained neutral. "Never heard of him." "Really?" Because Wilson Conrad was a decorated Special Forces operator whose wife and daughter disappeared from Phoenix 3 years ago. His wife believes he murdered a man named Drew Wood and kidnapped their daughter. Sounds like a domestic dispute. "I'm not sure how I can help." Agent Elliott smiled thinly. "The thing is, Mr. Walsh, we've been investigating Wilson Conrad for quite some time, and we've discovered some interesting connections." She pulled out a tablet and showed him a photo, Wilson in military fatigues, taken during his last deployment. Then another photo, clearly taken with a telephoto lens, showing him and Sarah at the local grocery store just 2 weeks ago. Facial recognition software is quite sophisticated these days, Agent Elliott continued. Even with the beard and the weight loss, the bone structure doesn't lie. Wilson said nothing, but his mind was racing through contingencies. The cabin had emergency supplies cached in the woods. Fake identities hidden in safety deposit boxes 3 towns over. Escape routes he'd scouted and memorized. But Sarah was in the kitchen, and running would mean explaining to a 10-year-old why they had to disappear again. "What do you want?" Wilson asked. "We want Emma to come home with us. Back to Phoenix, back to her mother. Her mother is the reason she was almost killed. Her mother misses her daughter and wants her family back together." Wilson laughed bitterly. "Family? Samantha destroyed our family when she started sleeping with Drew Wood. She put our daughter in danger, and that daughter paid the price with broken bones and trauma. That may be true, but it doesn't give you the right to murder someone and kidnap a child. I protected my daughter from a monster. That's what fathers do." Agent Elliott's voice hardened. "What fathers do is follow the law. They don't take justice into their own hands. The law would have put Drew Wood in prison for a few years, then released him to hurt other children. I made sure he'll never hurt anyone again." "Is that a confession?" Wilson met her eyes directly. "That's a statement of fact." Sheriff Christian stepped forward. "Mr. Walsh, or Conrad, whatever you want to call yourself, we can do this easy or hard. But that little girl is coming with us either way." From the kitchen, Sarah called out, "Daddy, is everything okay?" Wilson's expression became dangerous. "She's not going anywhere." "Yes, she is," Agent Elliott said firmly. "We have federal custody orders and the full authority of—" Wilson moved faster than either of them could react. His hand closed around Sheriff Christian's sidearm, removing it from its holster in one smooth motion. Before Agent Elliott could draw her weapon, Wilson had the sheriff's gun pointed at the ground between them. "I said she's not going anywhere." "You're making this worse for yourself," Agent Elliott said, but she hadn't drawn her weapon. Smart. She recognized a professional when she saw one. "No, I'm making it very clear. Sarah, Emma, whatever you want to call her, has been through enough trauma. She's happy here, safe here, building a life far from the chaos that her mother created. I won't let you drag her back into that. She belongs with her mother." Her mother chose Drew Wood over her daughter's safety. Her mother brought a violent criminal into our home. Her mother's poor judgment nearly got Sarah killed. Wilson's voice was ice cold. She forfeited her rights when she prioritized her own pleasure over her child's welfare. Daddy. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, her young face worried. It's okay, sweetheart. These people are lost. They're going to leave now. Agent Elliot looked at Sarah, a beautiful, healthy child who clearly adored her father and showed no signs of abuse or neglect. Whatever Wilson Conrad had done, he'd taken excellent care of his daughter. Emma, Agent Elliot said gently, do you remember your mommy? In Phoenix. Sarah looked confused. My name is Emma Walsh. I live here with my daddy. I don't know any Phoenix. The lie came so naturally that Wilson felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. His daughter had adapted to their new life completely, but it had cost her part of her childhood. The innocence of a child who'd never had to learn to lie to protect herself. Your real name is Bethany Conrad. Agent Elliot continued. Your mother misses you very much. Sarah stepped closer to Wilson. My daddy wouldn't lie to me. If I had another mommy, he would have told me. Agent Elliot realized she was losing the battle. The child clearly saw Wilson as her entire world, and extracting her would require force that might traumatize her further. She'd seen enough broken families to recognize when a child was genuinely thriving. We'll be back, she said finally, with more agents and proper authority. No, you won't, Wilson replied calmly. Excuse me. Wilson smiled, and it was the same expression that had terrified Drew Wood in his final moments. By tomorrow morning, David and Emma Walsh will have died in a hiking accident. Tragic fall into a ravine, bodies never recovered. You'll find our abandoned car at a trailhead and some scattered camping gear, but nothing else. You can't keep running forever. I don't have to run forever. Just until Sarah is 18 and can make her own choices about who she wants in her life. Agent Elliot and Sheriff Christian left without Sarah, but Wilson knew they'd be back within hours with reinforcements. He had maybe 6 hours to execute the disappearance protocol he'd hoped never to use. As soon as the law enforcement vehicles were out of sight, Wilson began moving with military precision. Emergency bags from hidden caches. Cash from multiple safety deposit boxes accessed through intermediaries. A series of phone calls to contacts who specialized in making people vanish permanently. Daddy, what's happening? Sarah asked as Wilson packed their belongings. We're going on another adventure, sweetheart. Just like when we left Oregon. Will I have to change my name again? Wilson knelt down and took her hands. Probably. Is that okay? Sarah considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. As long as we're together, it's okay. Wilson hugged his daughter tightly. We'll always be together, Sarah. I promise. By dawn, the cabin was empty except for evidence of a hasty departure. A car was found abandoned at a remote trailhead, along with camping gear scattered to suggest a fatal accident. Search and rescue teams would look for bodies that didn't exist in wilderness that had swallowed the traces of countless others. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the American West, a father and daughter began new lives under new names, protected by love and determination and the unforgiving code of a man who never forgot and never forgave. Samantha Conrad would never see her daughter again. She'd made her choice 3 years ago when she'd chosen adultery over family, selfish pleasure over her child's safety. Some sins carried permanent consequences. Some betrayals could never be undone. And some fathers would burn the world down before they let anyone hurt their children again. Wilson Conrad had kept his promise. He'd made Drew would disappear forever. And now he'd made himself and his daughter disappear just as completely. Some wars never end. They just moved to new battlefields with higher stakes. But as long as Wilson drew breath, Sarah would be safe, loved, and protected from anyone who tried to drag her back into the chaos her mother had created. That was a father's promise. And Wilson Conrad always kept his promises.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.